Greetings, and thanks for your interest in learning more about community investment trusts. This recording is going to be sort of a preview, or I'm sorry, a review of the community investment trust talk that I gave at Tulane City Center on Tuesday, September 27th, 2016, to an audience of community members, nonprofit organizations, individual developers, and just people who were generally interested in the concept of community investment trust. So let me start with who am I? So my name is Jenga Mwendo. I am a New Orleans native, a recent graduate of the Master of Sustainable Real Estate Development program at Tulane in New Orleans. And I'm also the founder and director of Backyard Gardeners Network, which is a nonprofit organization based in the Lower Ninth Ward neighborhood that focuses on the cultural traditions of growing food that are inherent and deep in our community, and uses them as a platform for community building and neighborhood revitalization. So my experience with community organizing and open space development is long, not only with Backyard Gardeners Network, but also an organization I worked with called the Lower Nine Center for Sustainable Engagement and Development. In 2012, I worked with that organization to organize people in our neighborhood around creating a plan, a food action plan, we called it, looking at what were the resources or lack of resources in our community and what we as a community could do to bring adequate access to food. We still do not have a grocery store in our neighborhood, and it's something that is much needed. So I became frustrated through that process around always being on the side of clamoring for help in a community that has little resources, financial resources, and not really having the power or the resources in order to make the type of development happen that we want to happen. So I went into the Master of Sustainable Real Estate Development program at Tulane, wanting to better understand how development works, how development happens, and looking for how people in low-income communities, and specifically Black communities, can make neighborhood development that we want happen in our neighborhoods. So I did my graduate research on collective community real estate investment. And you can feel free to email me at jenga.mwendo@gmail.com if you'd like to read a copy of my research paper. And one of the concepts that I came across in my research was the Community Investment Trust. The Community Investment Trust is a model that's currently being developed by Mercy Corps Northwest in Portland, and it's specially designed for low-income community investors. It's going to launch in the beginning of next year, so it's really a good time right now for us here in New Orleans to be learning about the work that they're doing, and we can watch how it unfolds and figure out how we can replicate it here in New Orleans. And so by giving this talk, my hope is to plant a seed here in New Orleans, connect with others who are interested, specifically and especially those with skill sets and resources to put this together. And I personally have developed a good relationship with Mercy Corps Northwest. I've had several phone conversations with the executive director and the business analysts there. In July of this year, I flew up to Portland to spend more time with them and learn about this model, and they've been very, very generous with their time and with sharing information. So I want to thank Tulane University. First, also thank Tulane Small Center. That's where I originally did this presentation, and I was thanking them. And during the first presentation that I did on September 27th, Sven Gachev, who is a Community Investment Trust business analyst at Mercy Corps Northwest, joined us via Skype. So I thanked him as well, and I'll thank him in this recording. And there'll be a part in my presentation too that was supposed to be, or that originally was done by him. So when we get to that part, I'll just sort of run through it as best I can. So let's begin. So I'm starting off with this slide knowing that it's provocative and it's an overgeneralization, but it keys into this larger conversation that's ongoing, not only within Tulane City Center, but also around the city and around the country, around gentrification, displacement, and other housing issues that are really pressing right now, particularly in communities where people of color live. In the case of the Lower Ninth Ward, where I live and work and where I'm from, many Black residents have purchased land outright, and the home ownership rate was higher than 60% before Katrina. So in this case, we can simply replace subprime loans with white flight and poor infrastructure, replace foreclosure with levee breach or flooding. The bottom line is the same thing keeps happening over and over again, and we seem to keep losing over and over and over again. This is a pattern. And this is the result. These are recent images from the lower 9. Now, this is not indicative of what the entire neighborhood looks like, but there are parts that look like this, and it is a problem. The image on the right was once an A&P many, many years ago. The last grocery store in this neighborhood closed in the late 80s, early 90s, and we haven't seen one since. So what I'm interested in is, how can low-income, specifically Black communities retain wealth and have a greater sense of ownership and control over our own communities? There's a concept called ujamaa, if anyone's familiar, for those of you who are familiar with the Nguzo Saba. Ujamaa is a Swahili word that means cooperative economics. It's about building and maintaining our own stores, shops, and other businesses and profiting from them together. The critical piece here is profiting from them together. And what is often missed in conventional community development is the profit piece. Who profits? Yes, the community profits socially from the presence of the development, but does the community, which is usually low income and therefore could use the money, do they profit financially? Usually no. So yes, property values may rise as a result of the development, but this only benefits property owners, and one can only realize that profit by selling the property, which usually means leaving the community. Additionally, people on fixed income sometimes have no room in their budgets for the rise in property taxes that come along with rise in property value. Finally, community development depends on waiting for others with resources to become interested enough in the project to make it happen. And the community waits and waits and waits and waits. But what if we could make development that we need happen and profit from it financially together? What if we could link the need for neighborhood economic development with the need for asset building? The good news is that it's been done. In Philadelphia in the 1960s, a reverend by the name of Leon Sullivan got his congregation on board with what he called a 1036 plan. He convinced over 3,000 people to set aside $10 a month for 36 months to raise funds for community development. One of the projects they did was Progress Plaza, which was a retail shopping center that's still in operation today, and it stands as the oldest African American owned shopping center in the country. Now, I estimated that between 1962 and 1968, Reverend Sullivan, the investors invested over $2.5 million in development. That's about $20 million in today's dollars. Imagine what $20 million could do in a neighborhood like the Lower 9. Imagine what we can do if we put our resources together. So enter the Community Investment Trust. And again, this is a model that's being developed by Mercy Corps Northwest, which is a nonprofit organization based out of Portland, Oregon. A community investment trust is a real estate investment trust. A real estate investment trust is basically a company that owns and usually operates income-producing properties. By law, they have to distribute 90% of net profits to their investors. The company itself doesn't pay taxes. The taxes are passed on or paid on an individual income level. The barrier is often that REITs tend to have minimum investment levels that make them unreachable for many people. So Mercy Corps Northwest has actually turned the REIT on its head and developed a model with a low entry barrier that's designed specifically for the low income investor. So the Community Investment Trust is defined by low monthly automatic investments. So investors can invest as little as $10 a month, and there's actually a cap, so they can invest only as much as $100 a month. There's a guaranteed 2.5% return. So one of the challenges in investing when you don't have a lot of money is the fear that you're going to lose it, the little money that you already have or that you have. So Mercy Corps Northwest was able to get a bank to write a letter of credit guaranteeing at least a 2.5% return to investors, to community investors. And finally, community investors actually sit on the board. So they are representatives from the community who are making decisions about what the Community Investment Trust does. So with the Community Investment Trust, low-income communities can, 1, build assets, 2, actually finance neighborhood development. So we can make projects happen that maybe wouldn't happen on their own. And then 3rd, we can, through doing those things, we can exercise ownership and control over our own communities. So next is a video that Mercy Corps Northwest did about the Community Investment Trust, and I'm going to play that next.
My name is Glendy. I live in Southeast Portland, and currently I'm living in an apartment. So obviously I'm not a homeowner. And Southeast Portland is an area that most of the family, their income is either barely enough to pay their bill, or some don't even have enough.
We've seen Portland gentrify. Many places in the country have gentrified. Gentrification isn't necessarily a bad thing. It reflects an influx of people. It reflects a positive economic circumstance that has driven prices up. The challenge, of course, is that it puts some people on the margins. It pushes people out of neighborhoods because they can't afford to rent there. They can't afford to live there.
Mercy Corps Northwest really is about helping people become empowered to get out of the cycle of poverty.
So we've devised a mechanism, an investment tool, an investment path for people to go from inaction to action at an acceptable dollar point.
It's the first community investment trust that we know of in the country. The Community Investment Trust will give members of the community that we're reaching out to an opportunity to invest a certain amount of money every month in the commercial property that's been purchased.
We own a building for the Community Investment Trust. It's called Plaza 122. It's 29,000 square feet. It's an office building that houses nonprofits and for-profit businesses. It's on a busy, visible street. It's at the hub of the neighborhood. People will have the opportunity to invest monthly at $10, $25, $50, or $100, and no more. That's the cap. They'll buy in. We have equity that we put into the building, and the investors in the neighborhood will, over roughly 3 years, buy out our equity, then it's their building. The investors can say, that's my building, I own that. Those businesses that are in that building are businesses that I will go support, because when they succeed, I succeed. So it creates a mutually reinforcing relationship in a neighborhood where the tenants do better, the investors do better, and we hope the neighborhood will do better because people own a stake in the outcomes that everybody's seeking.
Community Investment Trust, it breaks into the small pieces. So for the family like myself, it's reachable and it's doable. And I would definitely like to tap into that type of a program.
There's a benefit to investing both in terms of the dividend that's received, there's the appreciation of the property that's occurring over time, so there are those tangible benefits.
The other important part of it is we're offering education to go with the investment. In fact, it's a requirement, and people have asked for it. They said, I would like to make this investment, but I want to understand how it works. How do I budget? How do I make a plan? How do I align those two to make sure that I can make an effective investment and stick to it? That's the key of it, is just allowing people an option and a pathway for self-determination, unsubsidized.
So can a $10 investment each month in this project end up dramatically changing somebody's life? And even though this is a moderate investment and it's going to be a moderate return, maybe by breaking down some of those barriers, we can break the cycle of poverty that we end up seeing in so many communities.
So as was mentioned in the video, the community investors benefit in 3 ways. One, from the dividends that come from the net profit of the project. So as the project produces profit, as the businesses that are within the project are successful, those profits actually get distributed in the form of dividends to all the investors. They also benefit from the equity earned from the debt being paid on the property. So any debt that the property has, as the debt is reduced, the equity is then increased, and thereby increasing the value of the shares that the investors have purchased. And then finally, from the appreciation of the property value itself. So when the investor initially invests, the property value may be at one level, let's say $1.5 million. And then 2 years down the line, the value of the property may have appreciated, let's say by 10%. So the community investors actually can enjoy the benefits of the appreciation in property value when they sell their shares. So here's an example. This is an example that the Mercy Corps Northwest people put together for the Community Investment Trust. So let's say we have a $10 a month investor who has invested over the course of 4 years. So over the course of 4 years, they would have invested $480. Through looking at the dividends, the equity based on an assumed value appreciation, the equity, looking at the dividends, the equity, and then the property appreciation that's based on an assumed appreciation of 10% in the first year and 5% each year following. The investor would have gotten a $700 return over the course of 4 years. If they cashed out and got their original amount back as well, they would gross $1,180. So that's almost triple the initial amount that they invested. So as I said previously, that Sven Gachev was a part of this presentation, and he included some slides and some information about how the Community Investment Trust works in Portland. It looks like I do not have those slides. I'm not going to go through his part, but I'll talk about how this can work here in New Orleans. So remember that image that I showed in the beginning of the presentation. This is a building on St. Claude Avenue in the Lower Ninth Ward. And again, it's been abandoned since Katrina. Immediately before Katrina, it was a church. Long before that, it was actually a grocery store. But there hasn't been a grocery store in the Lower Nine since the late 80s, early 90s, and this neighborhood is considered a food desert in urban areas. Food deserts are those neighborhoods that are more than a mile away from a full-service grocery store. So there's several corner stores and gas stations in our neighborhood, but not regularly accessible places to get quality fresh produce, meats, and other products that people need. So usually when a developer looks at a project, one of the first things that they do is put together how the project is going to get paid for. So let's assume that the total development cost of this project is going to be $9 million, for instance. And so let's assume that we've put together possible sources, loans, sources of equity, grants, but we still have a gap. Let's assume it's $1.6 million, which is something that is, this is not uncommon for this to happen. So a solution could be the Community Investment Trust. The Community Investment Trust could fill that $1.6 million gap and ensure that the project happens. And this is the result. We could have a grocery store opening in the lower 9th Ward using this model. So some of you may be thinking, well, or some of you may think it's hard to believe that $1.6 million can be raised by low-income community investors over time. Well, what I've done is put together an example of how it can work. So what I did was look at the lower 9th Ward as of the 2010 census, which the numbers I'm sure are much larger now, but as of the 2010 census, about 2,100 households are in the lower 9. So let's assume that not all of the residents of the lower 9 are going to invest. Let's assume that a third of the population would invest. A third of these households would invest. So what I did was looked at the, again, looking at the census data, the incomes that, the income breakdown of the population of the lower 9. And so I took those numbers and estimated the amount of money that each tier or each income level might be able to invest, an average amount that that income level might be able to invest. So let's say people who make between $15,000 and $25,000 might be able to invest $30 a month. People who make between $25,000 and $40,000 might be able to invest an average of $50 a month. People who make over $40,000 might be able to invest $75 a month or even more. By the end of 1 year, we would have raised over $280,000. If we look outside of the community, and let's assume that we have a goal of reaching 500 investors outside of this community, and they invest an average of $50 a month, we would have raised $300,000 just through outsiders. That's still not close to $1.6 million, right? But if we look at that amount over 36 months, an annual total of $587,000 approximately over the course of 3 years, we would have raised over $1.6 million that can go towards development. So at this point, I opened the floor to questions. People had a number of questions. If anyone has questions who's listening to this video, you can email me your questions. And then finally, I closed with welcoming people to join NOLA CIT Development Task Force. And the purpose of this task force is to organize people who are interested in developing this concept to work together in order to do it. So if you're interested, you can email me. You can also give me a call, but email is preferred. And let me know what you're interested in and what your skill sets are. And we can go from there. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Please, again, email me any questions that you might have. and let me know if you're interested in joining the CIT Development Task Force. Thank you very much.